My name is Rolf Rosenkranz and I'm here at the European Development Days in Brussels, and with me is Joanna Maycock, the president of CONCORD, the European Federation of Development NGOs. Joanna, thank you so much for being with us today.
My pleasure.
So you are calling for NGOs to change the way they think about their role in development. Why?
Okay. I think a lot of NGOs, a lot of organizations working within civil society and working on global solidarity and citizenship and development are seeing a huge shift in the context they're working in. They're seeing a shift in both the nature of poverty and inequality, also the nature of power and resources and where they are in the world. So who do we need to engage with, about what? How do we mobilize citizens to support our cause? How do we raise the funds that we need to support the work we do around the world? Also seeing that global huge shocks are changing the way the context in which we're operating in the South and here. I think a lot of NGOs in Europe who've been working on international solidarity have been deeply affected by austerity in Europe, even in their own personal and family lives and in their own communities. Starting also to question whether the development model that we've been selling around the world is actually one that's relevant for them today. So reconnecting, I think, breaking down the barriers between North and South, much more a kind of global citizenship conversation about solidarity, rights, and equality, I would say. Then that makes us also question who we are as individuals, who we are as organizations, and how we actually adapted and organized to address those massive shifts in the global context.
Exactly, and so how as an NGO here in Europe or elsewhere really, should you adapt to these things? How do you need to operationalize these changes?
Yeah, so as CONCORD, and we're the Confederation of European Development NGOs, so we have 43 members across 27 EU member states, including all the biggest INGOs and the national platforms. So we represent around 2,000 NGOs altogether. And we think as the umbrella organisation, it's our role to help facilitate and enable that kind of conversation to happen amongst NGOs and amongst individuals working in NGOs. What we're seeing coming through that conversation, it's been a hugely participatory, crowdsourcing ideas. We've had hundreds of ideas that have been posted through our web debates and webinars. And we've tried to kind of enable individuals and organisations to discuss those ideas. What's coming through really clearly is the need to engage much more in a debate on what's happening in Europe and how that impacts on global poverty and inequality. That means much more engagement with civil society here in Europe, working on environment, women's rights and poverty in Europe, to talk about the global dimension of European policies. I think that's quite a shift. Less only focus on development policy, but moving into that global dimension. Secondly, the need to connect with social movements. So to perhaps an over-professionalisation perhaps in our sector, so reconnecting with values, reconnecting with movements. And what is our role as professional NGOs in supporting those movements or in connecting with them?
Let me ask you about your experience with ActionAid. You've been a leader here in Europe, working out of Brussels and overseeing to a degree and participating in this restructuring of ActionAid into a global federation that centralizes certain activities, moves certain things to the country level. What do you think has happened? How do you see that change?
Yeah, as you say, the last 10 years I've been involved in this process of internationalizing ActionAid, for turning it from a European NGO network with country programs in Africa, Asia and Latin America into a global federation that's governed and run by equal members from across the planet. It's been a huge change process, organizational change process, and it's been absolutely driven by our desire in ActionAid to be consistent with our values of power and equality and good governance. And we realized 15 years ago that actually to be an organization talking about poverty and power and talking about eradicating poverty in the South, we couldn't be based in the North. We couldn't have the decision making only in the North, but we needed to really not just shift resources south, but actually shift power south. And that's been the core of our federation. That's meant building national organizations in now something like 18 countries in Africa, Asia and Latin America, with national boards, national assemblies, who are federated to members affiliated to ActionAid International Federation, alongside with equal power and voice in our global governance with our European members and North American members.
And remind us, where is the headquarters of ActionAid?
Yeah, so our headquarters is in Johannesburg. It has been for 10 years now. That's where our CEO sits, our Director of Finance, our Director of Programs. and a good chunk of our international staff is based there.
So why do you think other NGOs haven't followed suit, at least not to the degree that ActionAid has shifted resources?
I would like, you should ask them, I guess. I think what we've done is was absolutely visionary, and the people that made that happen, I think, need to be absolutely applauded. It's fair to say, though, that it's not without complications. It's about giving up power. So first of all, you have to have an understanding that giving up power doesn't mean having less power. It means collectively having more power and the right power. And I think that's difficult, particularly for a lot of the larger NGOs, where they have a lot of power located in multiple members in the north, to reach that kind of consensus that they're really prepared to take the kind of risks that we took 10 years ago. But I think it's made us more accountable. I think it's made us more effective. I think it's made us more relevant for the future, more fit for the future. And we're having this discussion in CONCORD about how NGOs need to change and adapt to the changing context. And I feel as ActionAid, we've made a lot of the changes that we needed to make. Being more accountable to people and communities that you work with across the world, whether it's in Europe or in the South. Being more flexible and adaptable in that national context, to adapt and engage with social movements and social change, to not be afraid of disruptive change in the environment, but actually to embrace that as an opportunity to bring real change in people's lives.
So what is up next for ActionAid? What's the next innovation?
The next innovation, that's a very good question. We're launching a process called Vision 2025. We have already a very sound organizational strategy. We think we ought to keep thinking long-term ahead, and what are we going to be in the future. I think what's for us now is really very important to build and continue to build and strengthen our youth engagement. We see that the youth is really around the world providing great leadership already in social change, saying that they're not happy with the way the world is run. We're not happy with the way the world is run either. So I think getting that energy, working with social movements is going to be a big part of our change process now. Continuing and deepening the governance transformation across Africa and Asia, where we have now another 10 country programs transforming into associates and affiliates. We're also looking at opportunities to expand into some middle-income countries where we're not present, like Mexico, Turkey, Indonesia. But also I think what we're going to see in the sector is increasingly probably organisations merging and joining one another. I think in ActionAid we've done that quite a few times and quite open to those kind of discussions as well. But I think that we'll see a lot more of that happening in the sector.
And in which areas do you think? Who is the most vulnerable, or who are the partners that everyone is gunning for? Okay,
so no, I think I changed the question. I think what organisations need to do is to look really ahead and be very honest with themselves about where they are as an organisation, from a values, from an impact and from a financial perspective. And it's much better to join in, engage in a merger, or if you're doing it for positive reasons than if you're doing it for negative reasons. So I think that's the kind of conversation that boards need to be having, I think particularly at governance level, really honest conversations, not having to merge when you're in a financial difficult situation, but actually looking ahead at what's a good fit for you in terms of having impact. And that might be some sort of strategic partnerships at national level, it might be much bigger scale mergers, but I think if I look at my role within CONCORD, the kind of conversation we're having is about how NGOs need to adapt, not to survive, but actually to thrive and to have a greater impact on people's lives. And I think what we're going to see is much more global level cooperation and collaboration, whether that's through mergers or more strategic partnerships. I think I hope much more engagement through coalitions and alliances in Europe and globally. So investing, I think particularly NGOs who've got resources need to invest their time and resources in those alliances and coalitions and working together. Also, I think probably more cross-sectoral interactions and engagement. So collaboration between the women's movement, the development movement, and the environmental movement, I think is going to happen a lot more.